Okay, awesome. Well, hi everybody, and thank you for joining us today for this really special webinar. My name is Sarah Marrero, and I am the coordinator of College Access Communications at the Tennessee Higher Education Commission. And today we are excited to deep dive into the selective admissions process of two of our amazing institutions here in the state of Tennessee. We have Vanderbilt University and Rhodes College here today. And this webinar is specifically designed to help you as college access professionals and school counselors and to guide your students through what can end up being kind of a complex world of college admissions, especially when it comes to different schools doing their admissions practices differently. So we have two fantastic guests today. First, we have Mike Drish, who is the Executive Director of the Office of Undergraduate Admissions at Vanderbilt University. Thanks for being here, Mike. And we also have Alex, is it Mise?
Mise.
Nice. Okay. I should have asked you that before we
No
started recording. I'm
worries.
sorry, Alex. And Alex is the Associate Director of Admissions at Rhodes College in Memphis. So both Mike and Alex are going to bring, obviously, a wealth of knowledge and experience from their respective institutions, which will transfer over and help us to understand the world of college admissions a little bit better. And they're going to shed a light on what makes a strong applicant to their colleges, and also some of the nuances about selective admissions and how students can best prepare for the college admissions process in general, especially with selective admissions. So feel free to put any questions, like we said, in the chat, and then we will make sure that we get to those questions, and Suzette will be monitoring our chat today as well, so that we can get to all those questions. So why don't we go ahead and start with you, Mike, and if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about your admissions process at Vanderbilt and what should students and school counselors know.
Yeah, well, first of all, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Sarah and Suzette, for hosting us this morning. Glad that everyone could join. And for those who watch the recording, hopefully this is really helpful. As you heard, my name is Mike Drish, and I work in the admissions office here at Vanderbilt University. And I think that, the place to start, I think, first and foremost, is that I absolutely can understand how there can be an intimidation factor for students and their families when they look at highly selective universities, because they see the numbers and sometimes automatically say, you know what, I don't even know if that's worth it, or is that a place for me, or do they really want students? Sometimes even the question is, do we want students from Tennessee? The answer is yes. And so a lot of times there's a lot of assumption that goes into what it means to be a highly selective private university. And I've found, as I visit across the state, students, all types of high schools, from rural areas to here in Nashville, a lot of it is just kind of debunking myths about what we're here to do, or what we're all about. And so a few things that I wanted to start out with is, first and foremost, we love Tennessee. Vanderbilt this year, our incoming class is almost 13% students from Tennessee, which is almost an all-time record in the last 20, 30 years. I'd say of the top private universities in the country, we probably do the most to recruit and enroll students from our home state. And so that's the one question I've answered multiple times, especially in rural areas of the state, is, well, we kind of thought you didn't want people from nearby, that you wanted people from far away. Yes, we do want people from far away, but we want people from nearby as well, because that's a great benefit to our Tennessee students who get the chance to come to Nashville, go to Vanderbilt, and are surrounded in their classrooms, their residence halls, the clubs they join, by students from other southern states, other parts of the US, and then across the globe, because it sets them up for success in many ways. And I share all of that because all of that is on our minds when we're going into the admissions process. In a highly selective admissions process, we have the simple benefit to us is we get enough applications where we get to choose who ultimately is a part of our community. And I've worked at a wide variety of universities. That's not always the case at a lot of places. And so we take that as something that we're so fortunate that we're in that position, and that there are a lot of students who want to be at Vanderbilt. But our goal in the review and selection process is to identify students who will thrive at Vanderbilt in this environment, will make us better, will gain from the experience, and ultimately will represent a wide variety of people. And the worst thing I could ever think, if you told me like what would be the worst thing about admissions, would be a campus of students who are all the same. That sounds awful. But the thing that's really funny is so many students go into this process thinking, oh, so-and-so got admitted to Vanderbilt last year, I need to be like them. And I think that plays out with a lot of selective admissions. It's like, oh, that must be what they want. And what ends up happening is they don't have the full picture of that individual, number one. And they also don't understand that a lot of the things that they see are probably not the reasons we admitted the student, but it's the things they shared in the application or what others shared about them that a lot of times people don't even know is what really tipped the scales for us. And so that's the other kind of thing that people think they know why we make decisions. I can't tell you the number of parents, sometimes even admitted parents, who are really genuine, but they're like, oh, I know why my child got admitted. It was that test score, or it was this, or it was that. And everyone around them just kind of believes them and never asks us. And they go, oh, that must be what gets you admitted to Vanderbilt or a school like Vanderbilt. And so another thing we have to debunk a lot is what you think is why someone may have gotten admitted may actually have nothing to do with why they got admitted, and not making those assumptions that that's why someone got admitted or why they got admitted in the past is why we may admit someone in the future. So that's the one thing I wanted to make sure that we kind of took away from this session is there's a lot that most parents, most students don't know, and we get that. And that's why we try and be really accessible. We're at college fairs and high school visits. We host programs. We want people to come to campus from across Tennessee so that we can help them understand the process. And we're pretty transparent at Vanderbilt, and we really want them to know what they need to know. And you'll hear a little bit of this today, so that they absolutely go into this feeling a lot better and a little less anxiety about this process. Because there's always going to be some anxiety no matter what. But we try and dial it down a little bit so that people don't feel like they should know something or that they should come into this with a lot of knowledge, because most parents and students and their influencers just, they don't live and breathe this every year. Luckily, those on the webinar, you're living and breathing it every year. But we know that it's an ever-changing situation too. And so we want to try and help with that. So the spirit of our admissions at Vanderbilt is really grounded in the fact that we do a very contextual review, because we want to get to know every applicant based on what we've asked them to put in the application. And then we can envision whether or not they will be a great addition to the Vanderbilt community. It doesn't mean that they are, if they're not admitted to Vanderbilt, for example, it's no reflection on them as an academic student or kind of what they've done. It's that we have close to 50,000 applications for 1,600 spots, and we admit around 2,800 students because so many say yes to us. And as I mentioned, of those that enroll, a sizable percentage are from here in Tennessee. So the inputs that we ask for, we get the Common App. On the Common App, we're looking at the academics. We're looking at the extracurriculars or work experience or volunteerism. We're looking at any additional comments they share. We read the Common App essay. Vanderbilt has one short answer essay. And then we look at their letters of recommendation, 2 from teachers and 1 from their counselor. We put all of that together. Those are all the inputs. So students, you all help with that. They put all those inputs in, and then we review them. The key thing with each of those, just really quickly, is that on academics, we're not expecting perfection. We do want to see that students have challenged themselves in whatever ways possible. We have no judgment on challenge. That could be AP, that could be IB, that could be dual enrollment, that could be getting a certificate through Schoolhouse in a course that's not offered at the high school. There's a number of ways that we're open to understanding rigor. I think, again, the misconception is we don't consider some things like taking a class at a community college rigorous. Yes, that's rigor. That's a college classroom. That's a good thing. So I think sometimes that's important. We're looking at the rigor and how a student performed, because we want them to get to Vanderbilt and not be set up to fail. And this is a top university with rigorous academics. The good news is we have students who thrive here from every corner of Tennessee. And so there are students who can do the work and do great work at Vanderbilt, but we know that maybe not everyone is set up for that success. And we don't want to just admit someone for them to feel good. and then get here and really struggle and reflect back and go, maybe this wasn't the right choice for me. We don't want to put someone in that situation. On the extracurriculars, it's quality over quantity. We don't count the number of activities someone's involved in. We look at the quality of their impact, what they did with their time. Again, there's no judgment here. If there was a student who had to help take care of their family members, if they had to work a part-time job to help support the family, or if they had the benefit of joining clubs and organizations or playing on, an athletics team or being in the performing arts, it's all good. All of that is great. As long as they talk about it, they help us understand how they spent their time, maybe why they had to spend their time that way. We care about getting to know them. And the football captain who's involved in service projects is no better than the lead of the player production, or the student who works maybe as a cashier at a local place of business and also helps support their siblings and their parents in getting their siblings from point A to point B. Those are all equally great. We just need students to tell us about all of that. Then we will look at their essays. We have the Common App essay. We have our short answer question. Here's the key takeaway on this. We are not looking for the best written word we've ever read. We know these are 17 and 18-year-olds. We're looking for content. We're looking for, did you answer the question? And what personal insight do I learn about you? So it's not that they have to be perfect. It's not that they have to have some great thing they've overcome. They have to have some amazing story. No, no, no. They just have to talk about themselves and how it frames kind of the rest of their application. If they've done that, they've done what we expect. And too often they think they have to be so unique or do something that no one else has done. No, they just have to talk about themselves in a way that no one else could talk about them, which is why, and maybe we can talk about this in the Q&A, where there's pros and cons to using assistance tools for the essay, because sometimes assistance tools don't allow you to have the personal insight. You could write an essay and have complete sentences, but will it be the insight we are looking for to tip the scales to admit? And then finally, letters of recommendation. Again, teachers and a counselor. For the teacher recs for Vanderbilt, you might be applying to have a kid applying to engineering. I don't care if it's a math or science recommendation for those students. All I want are teachers who know the student and can talk about who they are in the classroom and as a person. And I'll tell you, sometimes we have, back to the example, we have engineering applicants who love music and they get involved in our bands and orchestras and ensembles. And the best letter is from the music teacher or the band director, because they know them, they've been in that for maybe multiple years, and they have great insight about them. And they got admitted because maybe they took the math class and they sailed through it and they never needed to really engage with the teacher because they were just knocking it out of the park. That teacher, when we see those letters, sometimes the teacher is almost like, I don't know what to say here, because this kid is amazing. They've learned the content. They really didn't need my help. And they're really great as a student, but they don't know much else about them. That's not a great letter. Sometimes the letter from the teacher who had them in 9th grade and then again maybe in 11th grade, or the teacher where they struggled a little bit and they overcame that challenge by coming in and getting assistance or tutoring or whatnot. Sometimes the course where the student got the B might be the best teacher letter. And so that's the thing. The other thing I'll say about letters is that sometimes helping students understand, just because people in the school talk about how oh, Miss Johnson writes the best letters, you need to get a letter from her. If they don't know Miss Johnson, if they've never interacted with her, she's not going to write a good letter for them. So it's not who writes the best letters, it's who can share the most insight about the student. And it's all of these little steps that I talked about, the academics, the activities or work experience, the different pieces like the essays, the letters. It's moving along the steps toward admission. And for every student who doesn't do what I just talked about, there are probably 100 students who did. And so slowly those students are moving a little closer to admission, not because the other students didn't do all the required things, but they didn't do them in a way that helps move them further along in the process. And like I said, the good news is everything I talked about, we see from students from every type of high school in Tennessee. So it's not limited to certain types of schools, certain areas of the state. We're admitting students from most of Tennessee, and because they're able to do what I just said. And so anything we can all collectively do to help further support that is really important. And so all of this happens. The final thing I'll say is we have a few decision plans. We have early decision and regular decision. The review, everything I just talked about, is exactly the same for both. There's no difference in review for early decision versus regular. Early decision has a little higher admit rate. That deadline is November 1st, or ED2 is January 1st. Students obviously hear back earlier and they commit to Vanderbilt if they apply through those programs. ED has about a 15% admit rate. Regular gets the majority of our applications, and that admit rate is about 5%. A lot of students say, well, gosh, those are very different. Why is that the case? Do you love ED more? No, we don't love ED more. The difference is the applicant pool in ED does more of what I just talked about and represents every background and experience. So we're going to bring in about half of our class through ED, which makes for a little higher admit rate because it's a smaller pool. The one thing to remember about regular decision, and this kind of works for any place that has this, while I said our admit rate for regular decision, for a lot of your students, that admit rate may not be as low for them because they've done everything that we've wanted them to do. There are a lot of kids who apply regular decision that should never apply, or throw together an application on December 31st and kind of like try and get it submitted, and it just doesn't align with what we're looking for. So if you have an incredible student who's very prepared for Vanderbilt and puts together a strong application, their admit rate is going to be higher than 5%, for example. So I think that's one thing when people get really nervous about that admit rate at regular decision. I spent a lot of time talking to kind of the higher ability students saying, don't get too stressed about that, because for a student at a certain level, like we're talking about, their admit rate's probably going to be a little higher. So I'll stop there. I hope that's helpful insight on our process, how we make decisions, a little bit about our deadlines, but really looking forward to the questions in the chat, hopefully, that will allow us to dig a little deeper on some of these topics.
Yeah, definitely. Those are really, really, really great points. And you even answered a lot of questions as you were talking, which was super helpful too. So let's actually, Alex, if you'll go ahead and talk to us about Rhodes's, their process, application process. And then I think if we just kind of go over some of these questions for both of you at the end, that might be kind of the most comprehensive way to make sure that we get to all of them. So, but thank you, Mike. That was super, super, super helpful. So Alex, would you like to share a little bit with us about admissions at Rhodes?
Yeah, I'll jump right in. So my name's Alex Mise. I am a relatively new associate director at Rhodes. I've been here for a couple months now. You know, if I have any questions or things that I can't answer for you, please don't chalk it up to our admissions office. It's mostly probably as a newcomer status here. And I want to thank Mike. That was great. Quite frankly, a lot of the points that he made about their admissions process at Vanderbilt are going to be salient for us at Rhodes. It's going to be the same advice in a lot of ways. And I'll cover a little bit about the nuts and bolts of our admissions process and how that might differ a little bit from Vanderbilt's. So at Rhodes, we are a holistic review school, just like it sounds kind of like Vanderbilt is in terms of reviewing all the different materials that an applicant submits. And like Mike said, just to kind of burst a little bit of a bubble here in terms of any myths that may exist about our acceptance, about 25% of our students do come from the state of Tennessee. So a significant portion of our student population, we're not just drawing like the elite students from all over the country at the expense of local students or anything like that. We do have a very, talented and diverse student body here at Rhodes, and we work very hard to build a talented and diverse student body here. That being said, just in terms of kind of walking through what our admissions process is like, I have a colleague here, and I steal his metaphor every time I talk about our application process. When he's describing kind of what a holistic review is, he says it's kind of like taking a puzzle box for each student and dumping that out on the table and then kind of trying to put those pieces back together to see if that person will be a good fit for Rhodes College. And in that way, we're able to see all the different pieces that they bring to the table and kind of really put together a full picture of that student by looking at everything they submit. That being said, just on kind of a logistics standpoint from us, we are a Common App school. We do not have any supplement to the Common App. So the Common App will be your full application for Rhodes. There is no fee for applying to Rhodes with the Common App. So we really try to make that process as streamlined as possible for students to apply to us. That being said, I mentioned the puzzle box earlier. There are 5 big pieces of the puzzle that we're looking at, and probably none of these are particularly surprising to the crew that I'm speaking with today. So the first major piece is going to be grades. We're going to look at the student's GPA. Unweighted GPA is really the thing that means a lot to us. I know schools often use weighted GPAs for a variety of purposes. Unweighted GPA is really going to be, I think for a lot of schools, kind of what the number that they're really looking for. Not just the GPA, but also the courses that the student is taking. Like a lot of rigorous academic institutions, Rhodes wants to see that students are prepared for the level of rigor that they're going to experience when they come into the school. That means we're looking at, AP courses, IB courses, dual enrollment courses, any sort of college level course that is going to get that student ready for higher education is something that we like to see. And obviously we like to see that students have done well in those courses, not just that we're taking them. Something that I do like to point out is that we do take a look at the school that the student is attending and how many AP and IB courses that school offers. Obviously, if a student attends a school that offers just a huge wide range of AP courses and they took a whole bunch of them, that's fantastic. And if a student only attended a school that maybe only offers 2 or 3, but they took all 3 of those courses, that's great as well. So it is something we take into account. It's not something that is generally going to hurt a student if they're going to a school that doesn't offer that rigorous of a curriculum as compared to another student. The second piece for us is test scores. We are a test optional institution, and we truly do mean that. This isn't like a kind of a wink situation here in terms of submitting your test score or not. If you choose to submit the test scores, that's great. It's a data point for us. We will take a look at that. If not, it does not count against the student in any way, shape, or form. For us, just in terms to give you kind of an idea of the range that we're playing with at Rhodes, but the middle 50% on the SAT for us is about the middle 50% band on the SAT for us is about a 1300 to about a 1410 or so, and the middle 50% band for the ACT is about a 27 to a 32. Or so. And students always want to know, hey, should I submit my test score? I'm a little bit on the borderline here. Will it help? Will it hurt? Quite frankly, for us, students are welcome to reach out to us and have that conversation. I think one of the misnomers about the admissions process that students have, it might be that we're trying to look for ways to like ding students or disqualify them or say, well, I'm going to make a note against that student in their application that they reached out and asked about this. We mostly want to help students. So if a student reaches out to me and they have a score that's not going to help them on the SAT for us, and I say, well, should I include this? I'm going to be honest with them and I'm going to tell them I wouldn't include that. And it's not something that's going to hurt them in their application process with us. We love to have conversations with students about their application because it shows that they're interested in Rhodes, and we want to have that engagement with students throughout the process if possible. The third piece for us is going to be the essay. We just have the Common App essay that we are reviewing. As Mike kind of pointed out, we do want to see something that really reflects who that student is in their own voice. I always tell students when they come to Rhodes that this is the one chance in the application process for me to hear about you in your own words. Everything else is kind of data that we get from other people and from the school. So it's a great opportunity for students to tell us about themselves. It doesn't have to be the most incredible thing in the world that they've overcome. It doesn't have to be that they survived some incredible life circumstance. Really, it's just a chance for us to have their voice shine through. I will say, we do take a look, obviously, at the quality of writing that is part of the essay. I always just like to point that out just because I've read essays that are about just the most mundane thing, but the writing is fantastic and I've thoroughly enjoyed myself. And I've read essays that are about just the most unbelievable struggle that this student has overcome. But unfortunately, the voice doesn't quite shine through as much because the quality of writing is not quite there as well. So it's not the end all be all, but we are looking at the quality of writing of the application essays that are submitted to us. The fourth piece for us, Mike touched on this a little bit, is extracurriculars as well. Nothing is more, and the previous institutions I worked at and at Rhodes, there's nothing more frustrating than getting a Common App in particular where the student has clearly been involved in things outside the classroom and they have not taken the time to list them or include a resume or put anything on there. Because if they're not listed and we can't glean them from the letters of recommendation or essay, we have no way of knowing about those. And I think oftentimes students either just assume that we will pull that from their letters of recommendation, or they think, well, this was just me working as a, I don't know, as a cashier at Starbucks. I'm not going to include that. That doesn't say anything about me. Absolutely not true. They should include all that stuff. Very true that it is a quality over quantity thing. We like to see leadership positions, captaincies, presidents of clubs, that you've taken initiative. But even something as mundane as just an after-school job tells us something about the student that we wouldn't know otherwise. I did very little in high school, quite frankly. I'm always impressed with students who take the time to work, have part-time, full-time jobs. They're in high school. It shows a lot about the student. So I would encourage students to include almost everything in there. At the very least, it's not going to hurt you in the process if you include a bunch of extracurriculars. Finally, for us, we also require letters of recommendation. We need one from a teacher in a core subject. Math, science, something like that. And then we do require one from a college counselor at the high school. Kind of similar to the test scores we were talking about. If your student, maybe their best relationship was with a teacher outside of a core subject. They had a great relationship with an art teacher. Maybe their college counselor at their high school, or for whatever reason, doesn't write letters of recommendation, or the school has a policy where that doesn't take place. Once again, have them reach out to us. Students can always touch base with our admissions office and reach out to us for a point of contact and ask us if they can submit that. 99% of the time, it's something we can work around if we just exchange a couple emails with the student. So I always encourage that as well. A couple other things to, I guess, know about our application process. I'll touch a bit on kind of the different application bands that we have. So we mentioned early decision earlier. We have early action as well, and then we have regular decision. So for us, like Vanderbilt, early decisions deadline is November 1st. Early decision is a binding decision. That essentially means that, if you are accepted at early decision, we expect that student will attend Rhodes and will withdraw their application to any other colleges that they've applied to. Probably not news to anyone who works in this field, kind of what that process looks like. I always tell students that, early decision obviously is great for us. It makes our job easier, but it's not for everybody. And so if you aren't kind of, if we're not your absolute first choice and you want something else, for us, there are some perks to applying early decision, however. So Rhodes this year will be offering a $3,000 a year grant for students who are accepted early decision and who choose to attend Rhodes, which if you're applying early decision and get accepted, we would expect that. You are a little bit earlier in terms of the merit-based scholarships that we give out. So you're a little bit more towards the front of the line in terms of our review for those scholarships, which we automatically review every application for. And in addition, not for nothing, what I always tell students is that you're done with your college search fairly early in your senior year, which, if I recall, my senior year of high school would have been a really nice thing for me to be done with early on as well. So the next thing for us is just early action. That's November 15th. Early action, again, you're going to be a little bit more towards the front of the line in terms of our merit-based scholarships that we review for. And you'll be hearing back from us. I believe January 15th is our release date for that. And then regular decision for us is January 1st. You'll hear back from us March 15th. And what I always say to students in terms of the timeline there, early action is something that if the school offers, I really, really encourage students to go for, particularly if they're maybe they really like Rhodes or one of your top choices, but you're not quite ready to dive into like an early decision pool. The earlier you can get your decisions back from any colleges you're applying to, it just is better. It gives you more time to go over any other offers you've gotten, more time to gather information. If there's anything you want to discuss with the schools, it gives you time to do that. And if you get your decision back January 15th, then obviously you have 3.5 months till the big May 1st decision date for colleges for everyone around the country. So I always encourage students, earlier tends to be better in admissions. It's not the end of the world if you apply regular decision by any means. It's going to give you a little less time at the back end of things to go through everything on that end. So I'm trying to think if I forgot anything here. I think that's kind of it. Obviously, I hope that any questions anyone has, I can answer. Happy to answer any questions about our application process. I didn't really touch on financial aid or scholarships, but if someone does have any questions about that, I'm also happy to kind of touch on that as well. So thanks, guys.
We have some great questions. I do think that quite a few of them were answered. There was one question about what you all are looking for in terms of activities. I feel like we really got a good picture of that, which is really good to know. Mike, I think you mentioned about, and I'd love to just to hear from both of you, like each year about how many applications you get, how many students are admitted, and then how many enroll. So could you just go over those numbers one more time for us, Mike? And then Alex, we'd love to hear that from you too.
Yeah, here at Vanderbilt, we get close to 50,000 applications, and that represents all undergraduate applications, so students from Tennessee across the US and overseas. Like I said, overall, our admit rate is right around 6%. So we admit, I think if I'm doing the math right, it's around like maybe 2,800 students. And then we have a first year class of 1,600. And 800 of the 1,600 come in through early decision. The other 800 come in through regular decision. One thing that's also important to know is we utilize a wait list. We also defer students. So if a student applies the ED and they're not admissible, they have the option to defer, and we will do that and we'll reevaluate them. And then if a student's placed on the wait list, we actually go to our wait list every year. About 10% of our incoming class is made up of students who came in from the wait list, and another 10% is from students who were deferred. So if you work with a student who gets either decision and they're kind of like, well, this is it, there's nothing, no good's going to come of this, they're wrong. Good can come from those. So just wanted to point those aspects out too.
That's great. That's really good to know.
Yeah, so we get between 5,000 and 6,000 applications per year. We admit about 50% of our applicants, and we bring in a freshman class each year of about 500 or so students on any given year, maybe a little bit lower, maybe a little bit higher, depending on the year. And just like Vanderbilt, we also have a wait list that we utilize in our process as well.
Okay, that's awesome. Very cool. Okay, and then somebody had asked, Amanda had asked in the past, she had had an opportunity maybe to speak to like an admissions counselor at both of your colleges if she had a student that maybe was waitlisted or deferred, about maybe why that took place and how maybe other students could either submit something differently on their application or exactly what they're looking for. Is that available to counselors? Like can school counselors reach out to like an admissions counselor or somebody in your office to talk through that? Or do you guys keep that information a little bit more private?
I can start. I mean, in terms of reaching out about a specific student and about a specific admissions decision, we do try to be as transparent as possible. I know if you are getting into like the real nuts and bolts of why a specific student was accepted, waitlisted, or denied, it can be a little tricky to share that information all the time. To the extent possible, we love to be as candid as we can be with any counselors or students that are calling in to us or reaching out to us or emailing us. Ultimately, it may come down to can we share, the exact one particular reason why a student ended up on the wait list versus accepted. If it gets into kind of our internal processes, we might not be able to go into that exact detail, but we can certainly have a conversation around kind of general reasons why a student may have gotten decision A versus decision B. And I don't mean to seem dodgy on that point. It really depends on kind of how specific we're getting with the student and what kind of information we're able to give out. So.
Of course, that makes total sense.
And I would echo a lot of what Alex said. We're happy to have conversations with counselors and obviously students and families if they have any questions. We will definitely, if there's a conversation someone would like to have kind of before we release decisions, we're always up to having conversations. If it's after a decision was released and they're looking for guidance or understanding, like Alex shared, a lot of the conversation will kind of be around kind of here's what our institutional priorities were this year, and we were working with this volume of students who met that goal, and we had to really make tough choices. We may not be able to get into specifics, but it may be one of those things like I talked about where we would be able to say, the way this student framed this just didn't quite capture the reviewer in the same way that other students did. And so that's why I spent a lot of time talking about that stuff, because a lot of times that's where the decision comes down to. It's not that they have to be more nuanced. It's just, did they talk about themselves? I think Alex said this really well. It's kind of like, did they present the information we asked them to present in the spaces they were given? Or did they miss an opportunity thinking, well, no one wants to know I work at Starbucks 20 hours a week. We do. And if you don't list that, and the students we admitted did list it, that's a reason why they got admitted. Yeah.
Sure. That makes perfect sense. Yeah. Thanks. I know that that's a little bit of a trickier area, but those were great Great answers. Another really good question, Jennifer Gentry asked, what about homeschool students? So do you guys have suggestions for how to balance application materials like the school profiles, course descriptions, or portfolios in terms of demonstrating rigor for what may be more unconventional courses in terms of length of application? Homeschool students don't have the same access to AP and IB courses. So how do you see those? How do you handle those?
I'll jump in. I know for homeschool students, they go through the same review process as all of our other students. I will say and this, if I can take off my Rhodes hat for just a moment, this is just from my general experience here in the field. For homeschooling, if that's through like any sort of outside provider, if those courses are taken in tandem with any maybe online certification programs, any sort of outside educational service, it helps to have some sort of reference point for the homeschool courses. And I understand that is not going to cover the breadth and experience of all the homeschool students who are applying. The toughest ones, I think, just speaking candidly on our end, are ones where it's just the student and their parents, and they have prepared a transcript and they've gone through that process, and it's just the transcript from them, and the recommendation is from the parent, the counselor letter is from the parent. Again, this may be an exceptionally bright or talented student. It just means we have less of a reference point from which to draw. If they're looking to make their application more attractive, if they're able to take dual enrollment courses at like a local college, that's a great way to maybe make up the gap in IB and AP courses, just in terms of looking at the rigor end of things. And I will say, if they're able to, in the same way that extracurriculars are important in terms of making your application stand out, extracurriculars are a great way to make that stand out as well. Because if the student has been involved outside the classroom in a ton of great activities, organizations, things like that, it can make you say, okay, maybe I'm not able to compare this student's transcript in the same way that I might be able to a student from a high school that I know well, but look at all the cool things they've been getting up to and doing. Clearly, this is an involved, active, engaged student.
So typically, maybe it's a little easier to judge those courses if they use like an umbrella program or like a homeschool tutorial or something like that. Okay.
Yeah, it just gives us some sort of backdrop for saying, where do these grades come from? What's the material that's being learned? Any sort of reference point like that is at least helpful.
Sure, that does make sense. It makes it a bit more objective too. So that makes sense. Yeah. Mike, do you have anything to add there?
I would echo everything. The one thing I would say, we know that with letters of recommendation, that we don't need one from like the parent and another parent, like someone from the community, someone from the their like church, or whatever it may be where they're working or volunteering. All acceptable letters, so that again, it's all set up a little bit with the terminology for a school-based person, but no, homeschool students have that flexibility, and those are great letters.
Sure. Okay. That's really helpful information. I do know just from some admissions background, and also I was a former homeschool student, that those can have a bit more nuance to them. A homeschool application for sure can, but still really promising students. So I love that we're looking out for them too. Okay, we talked a lot about early decision. We had some questions about that, but I feel like we really got that covered in terms of, I heard both of you really recommend early decision and going ahead and applying for that. So I think that's great. We heard you guys talk about the number of students you usually accept from early decision. I have a question. Actually, I'll save my questions for you because I want to make sure we get to everybody else's. I have two questions for y'all. But okay, so some schools do not do an unweighted GPA. And so how do you calculate? I think, Alex, I heard you say you all use the unweighted GPA. Do you calculate your own GPA? Do you use like, I know in Tennessee we have like our Hope Scholarship Lottery GPA. How do you look at GPA there?
We internally calculate our GPA. So
Okay.
we just have, this is not exactly state secrets here. We just have like a program where we can put in the number of courses you've taken, the grades you've gotten, and then it helps us just generate an unweighted GPA for us. It's just an easier way. Again, to the point I mentioned earlier, there are schools where, by the time a student is a junior, all their classes are AP courses, and that's fantastic. But if the school weighs their GPA and then we're getting that GPA and it's a 4.8, a 5.1 or something, we need a way to be able to kind of cut through that and say, how does this compare to a close to straight A student at another school that maybe only offered one AP course, and so their GPA is a 3.9? So the only reason we do that is not to take away any of the accomplishments of the students who are having these fantastic transcripts and doing very well at their school. It's just a way for us to be able to compare across schools depending on, regardless of the way that they're weighting their courses.
Sure. Okay.
And we do the same thing. We recalculate the GPA. It's a weighted GPA recalculation where, again, I mentioned all of the different college prep avenues. There's no preference given to one over the other. And honestly, all that is it's kind of using that GPA as a routing tool. Every application gets reviewed. Every application is reviewed at least twice, but it gives us an idea of where should we kind of prioritize some of our time to make sure that we're reviewing students who are at least in the realm of viability based on our calculation. Everyone, if you have a low GPA, you're still going to get reviewed, and we're going to make sure that we're not missing something or that there's a story as to why you're there at that level. But we recalculate it and it's weighted based on all of we're pretty generous with college prep.
Okay, that's great to know. Along the lines of talking about kind of the merit of GPA, let's talk a little bit about test scores. So Mike, you had mentioned that you guys are also test optional. So Vanderbilt, the student is not required to submit that ACT or SAT score. I did want to ask, so for a student who does submit scores, is it better for them to submit both ACT and SAT? Is there one over the other? How do you all look at that? What if a student has taken multiple times? Does a higher score replace a lower score? Like, how can you guys speak a little bit more to those test scores?
Yeah, I'm glad we could circle back on this. Many of you probably noticed I didn't mention testing at all because we're so test optional that I forget about it, honestly. So I hope that's a testament to where testing really doesn't matter to us in that sense. But I think what's important for everyone to know is that we treat test optional like any other optional factor. So if a student submits it, we will look at it. And so it's better if they are worried at all about their test score to not submit it. The majority of our applicants and the majority of our admitted students do not have a test score. So they are truly at no disadvantage. And our mid 50% range is really high because the only people who submit are these incredible testers. So I'll give you all a great example. Our ACT mid 50% is a 34 to a 35. That's insane. Like, that does not mean you have to have a 34 higher to get admitted to Vanderbilt. But if you don't have that score, don't submit a lower one because then we're going to have to look at it. Just like no one would submit a bad letter of recommendation or an awful resume. It's optional. The ACT is optional for us. We could care less, ACT or SAT, whatever someone's taken, wherever they've done well. If they send it in, great. But if they haven't, our mid-range is so high. Half of my conversation with students is don't worry about the mid-range. If you don't have that score, just don't submit it. We don't even think about it. And that's the key takeaway is that if someone doesn't submit it, I don't go, oh, they must have a low score. I don't even think about testing for that application whatsoever. So I really want that to be clear because a lot of people are turned off by that mid-range and we are not expecting that at all.
That's great to know. Really good to know. Anything to add?
Yeah, I mentioned mine a little bit earlier. I would just say it's very similar for us. Again, I mentioned we'll be happy to have a conversation with students, but oftentimes, again, yeah, if you're not feeling comfortable with your test score, we're test optional. It does not matter to me if you submit it or not. So if you choose not to submit it, if you're on the fence, if you're nervous about it and you choose not to submit it, it's perfectly fine. It's not going to affect my read of your application. Similar to Mike's point, the students who tend to submit their test scores tend to be the ones who just hit it out of the park on the tests, and it's a no-brainer that they're going to submit their test scores. So yeah, I would say for any students who are nervous about testing, obviously they should take the tests, see how they do. But if they don't want to submit them, that's perfectly fine. And we do super score tests, by the way. I should mention that. So if you do choose to submit your score,
yeah, great point.
So
yeah,
just something I forgot about until now. But yes, if you do choose to submit them, we will super score the tests. So
okay, that's great to know. That's really very, very helpful information. Okay, Jason had the question about the Nashville Scholars Program, which we answered. Essay writing. So Caitlin had asked, yes, if somebody could maybe like host a workshop for students, I think that's a great idea. Maybe Caitlin to reach out to the admissions offices directly. And I'm sure, speaking as a former admissions counselor, someone would love to talk to your students. Love that captive audience. But do you all have any other sort of resources, or do you have like a favorite online helper tool resource that students can use? And then separately, I want to ask about AI. But before that, any sort of like online course or something to help students with essay writing? Any suggestions there?
We don't have anything specifically online, but to like Caitlin's question, we love hosting in-person or virtual workshops where we can really kind of be that human face. And honestly, I think what's so helpful is hearing from the people in admissions who can tell students and others, if it's a letter writing workshop with teachers, where it's like, if we need to reinforce what you've all been saying, and it's a little, and I know this generation sometimes likes the tool or the app, but I think the challenge in admissions is I think they don't understand who's behind the scenes. And then it leads to a lot of this distrust or not kind of certainty around things. And so we've really tried to lean into doing virtual or in-person workshops because we think the trust is so important, where that doesn't always have to be the case with, you know, like the DMV, you know, no one cares like about trust with that, or some of these other entities we interact with. But for admissions, we really love to try and do it that way. And that allows for more interaction versus a little, you know, bot tool that might, you know, say like, oh, your question appears to be about word count. Like, it's just like, does that really help in this instance? Maybe not, or maybe at a certain point after they've gotten that insight.
Yeah.
And I will say, just to echo what Mike said, I mean, admissions folks tend to be very willing to work with students and counselors who want to come work with them. And I know in our office, and I'm sure in Mike's office, if you reach out to us and say, hey, I would love if someone who maybe covers our territory or is in your office can come work with my students or do something, there's a good chance we can set that up and make that happen. So I would just say, never be afraid to reach out to either of our offices or any admissions office that you're kind of trying to work with and say, would someone be available to come speak with my students? Chances are that just makes our day when someone reaches out to us, because it's like, great, then I would love to have an opportunity to engage with students, share a little bit of our knowledge. It's one of the best parts, quite frankly, of my job. I love getting out and working with students, particularly when my head is down and I'm in the middle of reading applications. I would want nothing more than to have the opportunity to get out and go work with the students during the day. So definitely reach out about setting up opportunities like that. We can probably, there's a very strong chance we can make that happen.
Yeah. Okay, that's awesome. Good to know. Now I want to ask my question about AI. So obviously, I'm sure with all of the large language models and AI chatbots and the growth of ChatGPT, you guys, I'm sure, have faced this when reading college applications, college essays. How does that, I mean, how has that changed the kind of the landscape of selective admissions and college essays? Do you guys have ways that you try and filter out students and kind of check to see if they've used an AI to help them, or do you just kind of like leave it up to like the morals of the student? Like how does that go?
Happy to start, and curious, Alex, to hear what you're all thinking about this. So we, like I kind of said a little earlier, we view all of the kind of AI, Chat GPT stuff as assistance tools. One, because our faculty are embracing these things in the classroom. And so it's kind of like back in the day, you know, most of us know when like calculators could not be used. And lo and behold, we're all still able to do math, and we're you know, math is still a field and whatnot. And so a lot of our faculty take the approach that if we don't help our students understand this and utilize it in a very appropriate way, then we're doing them a disservice. And so our approach in admissions is kind of the same thing. Like, this exists, Grammarly has existed for years. There have been thesauruses that people could, for better or worse, choose a lot of words for their essays that maybe didn't quite align with what they should have been doing. We know there are a lot of parents who got out the red pen back in the day and they tried to help, and it ended up sounding like the essay was written by a 45-year-old lawyer or something than a kid. So there's been these assistance pieces ever since college admissions started. We view this as one that in some ways might be very helpful to students. The key advice we've been giving them is don't take it as that everything it comes up with is correct, and don't let it draft something so generic that you think it's good, but it actually doesn't help you. And two examples of this, Georgia Tech did a great example of this where ChatGPT is not up to date current. And so if you went into ChatGPT and said, I want a school of engineering that offers environmental engineering in a large city in the South, tell me the options. Georgia Tech wasn't an option because they created that program a year or two ago. So it'd be kind of like if you went to Barnes and Noble and pulled the book off the shelf from a year or two ago and thought, oh, this is my college search. This must be foolproof. It's not. It's not perfect. So just knowing that, a lot of times when I've talked to students about that, it's kind of like technology isn't perfect. Utilize it, but use your own thinking to go, is this correct? Do I need to get a second kind of double check? And that for many, that's who's on this webinar, who can help students kind of double check those things. On the language part, it's like we talked about earlier. If we're looking for personal insight in an essay, you can throw into ChatGPT, I want an essay about working a part-time job, helping support my family, and how it was important to me. And it's going to spit something out that is going to be kind of generic. It's going to have some great content in there, but it's not going to be why you did that, what you needed from that, or how it affected you. So it could help students get a draft, like a rough draft, and for some people that's really helpful. But then really you got to think though, how do I make this about me? How do I give my insight, my vantage point, my angle? And if you don't do that, got thousands of students who will have probably taken the first step and then did the second step. And if you don't do that, you're going to be a little bit outside, not because it was written by ChatGPT, but because it wasn't personal and insightful.
That's really very, very insightful. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, that was a great answer from Mike. So I'm just going to echo a lot of what he said. I will say, to his point, ChatGPT, when you get an essay, and I've now read many essays that little flags have gone off. I'm like, this I think is written at least in part by at least some sort of assistance tool here. It tends to flatten out whatever you're writing about. So it tends to make it very generic. It tends to make it very just standardized, I guess is the way I would put it. And you can kind of tell when you're reading through the essays, like just the cadence, the weight, the pacing, the length of the sentences. It just is like, you can just tell, like, this doesn't seem like it was fully written by the student. Now, that's not the end of the road. I'm not going to immediately like raise my hand and say, all right, this student's chopped because I can tell. But I would just say what it tends to do is it makes it so your essay doesn't stand out. You could be writing about this incredible experience you have, but if you just feed it through AI, it's going to make it this really just generic essay about that experience. I would also just caution, not to, again, Mike did a great job covering this. Students, I would just beware. I understand that the college process is strenuous, it's stressful. Students have a lot on their plate they're trying to get through. I would just caution any students you're working with, don't take the shortcut with ChatGPT of just copying and pasting that, moving it in there, because while I said, I'm not going to raise my hand over a little bit of assistance or something, if I believe something is wholly written by AI, or I can just tell like they had nothing to do with this. And there are have essays, at least in my experience. Just a horror story. We had one where the student had taken the time to edit out all of the little like insert here something phrases, but they had literally left the prompt on the front of their essay when they submitted it to us. So it was just like, I can definitely write you an essay about such and such. Here would be a good example. That's the nightmare scenario. Then I have no choice but to say, okay, this student just clearly copied and pasted this whole thing out of this. And that's obviously going to cause a bit of a problem. So it's a great tool if you know how to use it. I know students are now using it. I would just have a little bit of caution about the content it's producing, and I would still make sure that they know that they still need to take the time to work on that essay. ChatGPT and all these other tools are not an excuse just to say, well, I can bang out my college essay in 5 minutes, no problem with that now. So, yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. It does sound like, it's nice to hear that you guys are seeing it as like a resource and a tool in a way that students, they can show their ingenuity, in ways that they even utilize something like, like a chatbot to, or like you said, even Mike, like Grammarly. I mean, in some ways it can be a really helpful thing. So But it's good to know that you guys are looking out for it too. And I'm sure that you have noticed, I've started to notice, like once you read a few things from ChatGPT, once you use it yourself, you can smell it. Like it is not that hard to see. And I'll I'll Google something randomly and be like, oh yeah, definitely an AI chatbot wrote this. It is so interesting. Oh, Mike, I think you're muted. Sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, it is so funny how after reading it enough, it is distinguishable. Like at first I was worried that I wouldn't be able to distinguish it, but it does kind of read like when someone got the thesaurus out,
Yeah.
or is just really trying to be a little, I don't know the way to put it, but it's kind of very like flowery language. Like if someone was kind of writing something like that, it's not like Shakespearean, but it's kind of like that sort of tone where it's kind of like, wow, like this doesn't sound like a high school student kind of came up with this.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is pretty interesting. One more question for you all before we wrap up here in just a minute. And this one is a question from yours truly. What about a student who might have like a legacy status? Does a parent or a sibling attending your college have anything to do with or influence at all their admission to your university? Like, is that something that you'll consider? Is it something a student should put on their application? What does that look like for you all?
Well, I can say, I mean, obviously, we love the idea of a legacy student. We love the idea that a family wants to send their child to Rhodes after maybe one of the parents or somebody in the family has gone there. It doesn't weigh on our process. We don't have any particular like favoritism that we show towards that. Now, again, as I said, it's certainly something that we're like, oh, great, when we look at the application. But as part of our equation, it's not something that really weighs in that student's favor one way or the other too much.
Yeah, for us, it's kind of like the optional stuff we talked about, where it's something we'll consider if a student shares that for the reasons Alex kind of mentioned, like, oh, it's interesting to know this about the student and their kind of background. But only 12% of our incoming class had a legacy connection this past year. So it's not something that like drives the process or makes someone kind of defy all other parts of the application and get admitted. So legacy is really not a big issue for us at Vanderbilt either.
Okay, that's good to know. I'm sure you guys get lots of questions about that too, about admissions, and then I'm sure about financial aid. When I was in admissions, got lots of questions about legacy scholarships and things like that. So anyway, well, thanks you guys. I don't want to take up any more of your time, but I just want to say we really appreciate having you here today. And we appreciate your willingness to be able to share with our school counselors and our college access professionals more about how they can help their students and help them navigate those waters of selective admission. So we really appreciate it. And Suzette will go ahead and stop our recording, and we will upload this onto our webinars page. So